I'm glad to introduce Dr. Scott Robertson, who is here to tell us about his career path for the APS SSCP How Did I Get Here video series. Dr. Robertson received his Ph.D. in cognitive psychology from Yale University in 1983. Yale's cognitive science program was an interdisciplinary endeavor between the psychology department and the computer science department's artificial intelligence lab. He also received an MA in cognitive psychology from California State University, Fullerton, and a BA in social science from the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Robertson is now professor of information and computer sciences and associate department chair at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where he established HiChi, the Hawaii Computer-Human Interaction Lab. He is a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, APS, and senior member of the Association for Computing Machinery, ACM. He served as co-chair of the 1995 ACM Conference on Human Factors in Computing Systems and the 2014 Conference of the Digital Government Society. He is an associate editor of the ACM Transactions on Computer-Human Interaction, the premier journal in the field. Dr. Robertson's research is in the broad area of human-computer interaction, and he is currently studying how people use social media to learn about civic issues and make voting decisions. He is the recipient of multiple grants from NSF and ONR for research in social media, computer program comprehension, and cognitive skill acquisition. He is a co-inventor on 2 patents in the area of interactive computing. Dr. Robertson's career includes experience in academia, as well as the computing and telecommunications industries. Dr. Robertson, please describe your career path and tell us about any obstacles or barriers that you overcame along the way. In addition, tell us what has surprised you about your job and what you wish you had known earlier about this type of position.
Okay. Thanks very much, Sarah. I think this project is great because it seems like people really need to know these things. I wish I had known. I've been able to talk to people about their careers. They look really fantastic when they're on paper, but there's usually a lot of bumps along the way. So I have those, so I'll try to describe that. So I went to UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine as an undergraduate. And in the summer, the very first summer I was there, I took Intro to Psychology. And in that book, at the back of it was kind of a cardboard tear-out sheet, and you could, and it was a brain, and you could fold up the brain, and they had, put tab A into slot B, and it made a little brain, and it had the cortical areas described on the top, and I thought that was fascinating, and that was my introduction to psychology. At Irvine, I think I just want to talk a little bit about Irvine because it was very influential in my career path, which has been quite varied, as you'll see. So I started there, and because it was close to home. I grew up in Southern California, and at that time, then I lived in Orange County, so Irvine was close to home. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I took the gen ed requirements, and which I'm very glad I did because they exposed me to all kinds of things, sociology, anthropology, biology of behavior. I wound up in courses with people who I didn't know were fantastic people at the time, but that wound up influencing me. So, for example, Harvey Sachs, who was a sociologist and an early ethnomethodologist. I was in a class where we basically videotaped people and then watched the videotapes 100 times and made careful notes. It turns out that's something that I do today, and I had no idea that it would be so important. It's also the first place that I touched a computer. So I'm in computer science department now. As you said, it's my home department. And when I took stat class there, the person who taught it, he was also teaching something called cybernetics, which I took and I thought was real interesting. But he wrote a bunch of software for tutoring in the statistics class. And you would go into a computer room. It was a single computer behind glass, one of the gigantic computer systems. I interacted with it through a teletype, and it would do things like create a population for you, and then you could sample the population. You could take 1,000 samples, size 100, you put in whatever numbers you like, and it would give you the statistics from your sample, your mean and standard error and various things like that. And you could use it to actually, so it was basically, simulating the real life sampling process. And you could see all these things that were theoretical in the textbook. And it was really fun to play with. So that was my first experience with a computer. And other things that happened there were, it was my first experience with a experiment as well, a psychology experiment. So the very last year, I was very interested in social psychology. I got my degree in social science there. So I really liked the sociology courses, anthro, biology of behavior. And then I got very into the personality sequence and social psychology. So I pretty much thought that's where I was headed. But the very last semester, I took the experimental psych course, and we ran an experiment. First time I collected human data in a lab. The professor, whose name was Myron Bronstein, I looked him up before our interview, and he's an emeritus professor still there. And he helped me embarrassingly, with my ANOVA to try to get it to work. And anyway, it was fascinating. My first experience collecting data, interpreting it, and writing it up. So I decided I wanted to go to graduate school at that point, and I applied to lots of graduate schools, but here's something that surprises me. I really didn't have a plan. I liked personality psychology, I liked social psychology, but I didn't, the statement of purpose thing, I didn't have anything really to say except that. And so I applied to several graduate schools and got letters from some of my professors, and I was rejected from every single one of them, every one of them. So it was a bit of a shock, this is what I was planning to do. I really didn't have a plan B at all. So I wound up deciding to get a master's degree at Cal State Fullerton. So it wasn't in my plan, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. So I applied there, and I got into the psychology department, and I got a call from a guy named Arthur Gracer, who's had just graduated from University of California, San Diego. And he said he is a cognitive psychologist. He's now at the University of Memphis. And he said, would you like to TA my experimental psych class? So I said yes. I had no idea if I could do that, and this will be a continuing theme. And I went there, and we really hit it off. He was, like I said, he was a cognitive psychologist. He came from San Diego. He was a student of George Mandler's, who's a cognitive psychologist. Cognitive psychology was not really my interest. It was social and personality. But I TA'd the class. We really got along great. He was a good computer programmer. So I started writing programs to run experiments, learning languages as I needed to, started taking computer science courses at Fullerton in addition to the master's degree psychology courses. And Art Gracer was very serious about research. So he started research groups where we collected data, we wrote conference papers, and he somehow managed to scrounge up the funds to get us to go to conferences if they were accepted. And he generated an expectation that this was what we should do. And so I really found my way into cognitive psychology that way. His area was language comprehension, and he was studying how people answer questions, read narratives, represent stories in memory, and things like that. So I wound up with a kind of a little body of research of a couple of years at Fullerton, in addition to having Art as a mentor and now as a friend and as somebody who continued throughout my whole career to help me, and which is another important point. So I applied to graduate school second time around, and one of the things Art said was, gee, you should apply to Yale, because Yale, two people at Yale, Roger Schenck and Bob Abelson, had just written a book, which I actually found on my bookshelf. It's called Scripts, Plans, Goals, and Understanding, and it was the big deal book in cognitive science at the time. he said, oh, you should go there. And they studied story comprehension and narrative and so on. So I said, yeah, fat chance. I'm not getting in there. I was not, Yale quality grades and scores and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, why waste my money and so on? And he said, no, you should do it. So the second time around, I got into most of the graduate schools that I applied to, including Yale. And I think the reason was because of the targeted research that I had done at Fullerton for my master's degree. So after just 2 years, it was a complete turnaround for me. So I went there. I packed up my stuff. I put everything I had into a little Ford Fiesta, drove cross country. Sort of the first time I left California for any real reason. And wound up in New Haven. And that was probably the experience there in graduate school is probably the most critical experience, certainly in my career, maybe in my whole life. It was very eye-opening. It was a kind of environment I've never been in before. It was extremely intimidating to me. So the people who were there were just people I never met anyone like them. The students who were there were extremely smart. And I just didn't feel like I was exactly in that category, but I persevered. So I managed to get through. It was an interdisciplinary program. It was between the AI lab, where we had to take our computer science courses, and the psychology department, where we had to do all their seminars and various courses. But it was, of course, a very serious research environment. I learned a lot there about doing AI kind of research and about grant writing, because it was a kind of a grant factory as well. So I picked up an awful lot there. I went there to work with Schenck and Abelson, but I met a professor there named John Black. He's now at Teachers College in Columbia. And he was working, he was a student of Gordon Bowers at Stanford, who's a cognitive psychologist. And we hit it off, and I started working with him, and he had a side interest in human-computer interaction. So he knew people at various companies like IBM, which was in New York, nearby, and they were beginning this field of studying how people use computers, how to use psychological data and methods to evaluate computer systems, to inform the design of computer systems. And it was really the beginning of computers being picked up by regular people. So, engineers and scientists and mathematicians were using them, but now it was becoming more of a thing for regular people like secretaries and accountants and things like that to use computers. So there was a need to understand real people. Very last year at Yale, I went over a summer internship to IBM, Watson Research Center, which is in New York. And I worked with a guy named Jack Carroll. And we studied secretaries using a text editing system. And we did exactly what I had done way back at Irvine. We just sat in a chair and we asked them to talk out loud, and we videotaped them and took notes, and then tried to understand what mental models they were building, what mistakes they were having, and things like that, and then try to have some feedback on design. So I went back to Yale after that summer, and I think nobody really understood what I had done, because the lab there was all about language comprehension, AI systems to do question answering and summarization of text and things like that. HCI was just not something much on their radar, but luckily, they let me do a dissertation in the area. John Black wound up as my advisor. Jack Carroll at IBM was on my committee, and he has turned out to be another one of those lifelong friends and mentors. He saved me several times in my career, so I'll mention that. So I did the dissertation in that, decided I was interested in academia. So I was lucky enough to get a job. I got one job. My very first job was at a smaller university, and I wanted to go to a larger research university. So I made a choice to apply to Rutgers, and I got a job in the psychology department at Rutgers. And it was a very big psychology department, a typical diverse psychology department with the clinical side, developmental psychologists, behaviorists, cognitive, everything. And I started a lab. I wound up with an NSF grant and to start working on language comprehension stuff. And I was publishing in HCI, Human-Computer Interaction. And that fell under, there was a professional organization called the Association for Computing Machinery. Computer science scientists belonged to it. And they had started a special interest group called SIGCHI, Special Interest Group in Computer-Human Interaction. So they had an annual conference, and my dissertation, I actually presented it there. Don Norman was in the front row. I was extremely intimidated to do it. But at any rate, I was publishing in proceedings of that conference and journals. And tenure time came around. Sorry, I don't know why that... Hang on. So tenure time came around, and it was just kind of like that. A big discussion, I guess, ensued about, well, is he publishing in APA journals? And I really was not, so I failed to get tenure, which was a second big bump in the career. That was a lot like not getting into graduate school the first time around. Obviously, very big bump in the career. And I didn't really know what I was going to do and all that stuff, but I had made a lot of friends and professional connections in SIGCHI, ACM SIGCHI. So they really rallied around and said, helped me out, especially Jack Carroll at IBM, who said, why don't you come to IBM? And I wound up working there with them, with him and Mary Beth Rawson and a group there that was basically, and at that time, what they were studying was something called object-oriented programming. It was the first time, it was a new paradigm in programming. I had heard about it, but I didn't know a lot about it. They said, oh, can you come work on this project? And once again, I said, yes, of course, without having any idea if I could do it. So I made the jump, and it turned out to be a very, very good thing. I learned an awful lot about object-oriented programming, which has now turned out to be a good thing in my current position. I got a lot of experience in industry there. But I went there at the beginning of the tech bubble bursting, and Jack and the rest of my group actually left, and I wound up sort of without having any group inside of IBM. So I started looking around for another job, and there was another company called, so it's another crisis in the career path. Like, what do you do now that this company is changed? They also announced that they would have downsizing for the first time in the history of the company. And I actually went to the manager 2 steps up. In IBM, you always worry about where you are in the organization. And because he was now my new boss after my boss had left, I didn't know him at all, and he didn't know me. And so we had a discussion, well, should I stay here or should I take a severance package that is voluntary? And he said, well, I don't really know what you do, so if you want to take it, you can take it. So I did. I thought I'd go to a new company that had relatively new. It was called US West. It was part of the breakup of the Bell system. It was one of the results of that. And they had inherited, or a bunch of people chose to go there from a research lab called Bellcore and Bell Labs. And so it really had some of the fantastic, researchers there. And also I was pretty sure that it was the future of, that telecommunications was going to be the future of technology. So I did go there, and I had a chance there to work, and that meant packing up and moving to Colorado, Boulder, Colorado. And the lab there was fabulous. They studied all kinds of things. And I wound up doing lots of various things there. So I worked on the design of remote controls for interactive TVs, the design of personal digital assistants and how they could work with the television. We started an education project to try to bring internet into schools and so on. So at that point, I was starting to become very far away from what I originally thought I was going to study, which was, language comprehension and AI and all that kind of stuff. So my career was going fine, but at this point, I was not feeling terribly in charge of it anymore. And I think I mentioned the tech bubble was happening, was bursting. So this really affected the telecom industry. They went through a huge bunch of mergers and acquisitions. I wound up leaving the research group there, but staying at the company and working at the library, the corporate library, on a knowledge management project, which was fascinating, and wound up continuing to publish in that area and writing almost a sort of social media type of application for research in libraries. But at any rate, US West got acquired by a company called Quest, and then this creates all kinds of turmoil inside the company. And so I decided I would go to a spin-off of that company. They had spun off a company called Media One, and so I went to that company. And it turns out that most of the Belcorp people had gone there, and they had some fascinating research going on. They had a smart home lab there, where they were, again, observing people. They had all kinds of new technologies. They would bring families in and have them live in the home all day long, do their homework, make breakfast, that kind of stuff, and use the technology. And so, again, all the observational skills and experimental skills came into play. Also, I was able to use continue to improve my programming skills and so on during that time. Okay, well, so then along came AT&T and acquired Media One, and then shortly, within a year after that, along came Comcast and had some kind of takeover. I don't understand these things, but anyway, they took it over. So more turmoil. So this is something that happens in industry, especially technology industry, is insane. And you have to do a lot of jumping from iceberg to iceberg in that industry. But if you are agile, then it works really well. So again, I found myself looking for a job and decided to go back into academia, mostly because a job became available at Drexel University in Philadelphia at that time in information science, very interdisciplinary area. And that was becoming what I was, much more interdisciplinary than I used to be. So I went there to Drexel. And it was almost like starting over, because I had been in industry. I had done, object-oriented programming, and then, remote controls, and then educational technology and smart home. So I didn't really even know what I was doing anymore in terms of a career path. Usually in academia, you define, here's what I'd like to do, and you pursue it. But in industry, you have to be a little more flexible, because you have to go along with what the interests of the company are. So I spent a little bit of time wondering, what am I going to do now that I'm professor again? They asked me if I would, teach some of the more advanced stat courses. And again, I said yes, even though I was like, well, I'm not sure if I can, but I'll learn it and go along. So I did do that. And around that time, we had a contentious election. Al Gore ran against George Bush, and it all came down to Florida, and there was a bunch of stuff with design of the ballot system there. And kind of at the same time, electronic voting systems were becoming a thing to a research area. And so I thought, hey, this will be the direction I'll go in. So looking at civic technologies for voting. At first it was voting, but it soon became obvious that that was only a small part of the technology aspect. There was also the decision-making part, and there was also the information gathering part. And so there are technologies that help with all those things. So that became really my new research direction. And I got an NSF grant again to go in that direction, which was really fantastic. But to make a long story short, tenure came again. And for the second time, I failed to get tenure. So again, a bump in the road that was quite surprising. I was not expecting that. And I don't know what the deal was exactly why or anything like that, but one thing that was important was that I had continued to participate in the CHI community, Computer Human Interaction Professional Community, under Association for Computing Machinery. By then I had actually chaired their conference in 1995. I had taken on various roles in the conference, so I think that's an important thing to think about is participate not only as a researcher and paper presenter, but if you're really interested in professional organization, volunteer for positions in the of service. I had done that and finally wound up chairing the conference, so I had an awful lot of connections and network of professionals within this community. And so I will say that that network has been, through all these bumps, they've been the core. I've always felt like those the network I have within this community, computer human interaction community, and they're very diverse. They work in companies, they work in universities, they're computer scientists, they're psychologists, they're sociologists, they're all kinds of things, and which is what's fun about it. But one thing they really are to me is a very central core for helping, it's very instrumental in a way. They've helped me get jobs, but it's also very emotional. It has an emotional stability to it and helped me figure out my direction. So it was time to figure out a new direction again. It just so happened that a job came along here at University of Hawaii at that time. And it was a job in the computer science department, but one of the areas they advertised was human-computer interaction. And also there's a professor here, Martha Crosby, who I had met way back when I was at Rutgers. We were studying how people program computers, and that was her area of interest. And I had even sent her a paper when I was way back then. And she said, oh, I kind of recognize him. And anyway, I wound up getting this position. So then it was a real long flight from the East Coast all the way out here to Hawaii to start that. And again, I just want to re-emphasize that people like, in particular, Jack Carroll and Art Gracer, they've been involved all this time. Of course, every time I had to ask them for letters, every time I made a change, every time something happened, I had to explain it and ask them for help, for letters mostly, and for moral support, and they were there, and that is extremely important. So, and those people are people that I met a long time ago, early in my career, and so it's really important to have those kind of mentors, to meet those people and then become that kind of person, hopefully, to someone else in the future. So I got here about the same time I got here. Social media started, Facebook, Twitter, all of those kinds of applications really started around the time I came here, 2007 or 8 or so. So I changed a little bit the research direction there. I would look at use of social media with civic engagement. Sorry about that. How people use social media to make decisions about voting and so on. Got another NSF grant, so that was nice. And at this point, I was starting to get to know people at NSF, which is another important career move. There are directors in the funding agencies whose job it is to talk to everybody, and they like it. And so it's good to talk to them about what there's going on in the companies. I don't know why this is about what's going on in the companies and within the organization, what funding they're interested in, and all that kind of stuff. So I wound up here. It's a computer science department, which is very odd because, as you know, I have a behavioral science background. And but because I was willing to kind of jump to anything because I got interested in computing and decided that I would just keep trying it, this is the best fit for me. So I guess to sum it up, there were several. I really never had charge over where I was headed. And there were several significant bumps. So, the not getting into graduate schools in the first time around, 2 tenure disasters, and in and out of industry, the tech bubble issue. So I think perseverance is extremely important. It's not like I just was happy and confident during those periods. In fact, I was very concerned during quite a lot of those periods. I had no idea how it was going to turn out, but I didn't give up. So I think not giving up is extremely important. And I don't know where that comes from, but just keep trying things, try diversity of things. There were things I applied for that I didn't get, too. So, so I would say it's like a combination. It's been a combination of really of good luck, like particular people I met and what they had me, like say Art Gracer, and the particular research I did wound up getting me into Yale, so that's good luck. Bad luck, tech bubble, things like that, and sometimes just dumb luck. Just wound up in places and turned out to do something interesting or meet somebody fantastic who stayed, a professional and personal friend. So that's the story.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Robertson, for taking the time today to tell us about your career path. We really appreciate it. It's very, very interesting.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.